Welcome to Thriving Together, a K-State Extension Douglas County podcast. Each month, we dive into real conversations about what it means to raise healthy kids, build safer neighborhoods, and grow stronger together. From nutrition tips to parenting insights to community wellness and safety strategies, we're here to share stories, resources, and inspiration that help us all to thrive side by side.
Because when families feel supported and communities come together, everyone has a chance to flourish. Get ready to thrive together. Let's get started.
Welcome back.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I need to wake my brain up this morning. It feels very foggy out because I have been trying to get kids back into that school routine.
Yep. It's hard. We're excited to be back with another episode of Thriving Together. So I'm Kaitlyn Peine, the Community Health and Wellness Agent for our team here at K-State Extension Douglas County.
And I'm Ginny Barnard, Executive Director for LiveWell Douglas County and Coordinator for Safe Kids Douglas County.
Yes. So when we were trying to figure out what to talk about this month, Ginny and I started to reflect back on our career. So Ginny has a prior career in Extension and is now on our team as our LiveWell Executive Director. And I've been in Extension since 2009, which seems like literally 100 years ago. But there are frequently asked questions that come up, and we thought we would dive into that for this month's episode.
Yes. So definitely keep in mind if listeners have questions that you're like, oh, we didn't touch on those today, feel free to share those. We would love to do a future episode where we talk about other questions.
For sure. People call our office or email, reach out on social media platforms with sometimes some really random questions, but there are frequent questions that come in that seem to be very consistent. So we wanted to cover those. Do we want to kick off with the first one?
Yeah, definitely.
So the first one is it okay for my baby to sleep in their car seat?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot, especially from new parents. We provide free car seat installation and education for families and their kiddos. And so this is a concern that families have about their kiddos falling asleep in their car seat. And the short answer is no. Car seats are made for transportation. So they're to get your kiddo safely from point A to point B in a vehicle. Especially for babies and an infant carrier, it's easy for us to keep them in that seat instead of pulling them out when we get to our destination. So if we get home and we're unloading groceries, it's easy just to keep baby in that car seat, especially if they've fallen asleep on the ride. So it's okay if they've fallen asleep in the car while we're traveling. Car seats are installed at specific angles, and that angle is to reduce the risk of suffocation or preventing the baby from breathing properly. But as soon as we take that car seat out and we set it down on the floor, do not set your baby on the counter. When we set it on the floor, it's no longer at that angle anymore. And car seats are not safe sleep environments. So ideally, we want all families to take their baby out and put them in that safe sleep environment, someplace that is flat, clutter-free, and the baby is on their back. So always putting baby on their back is the safest way for our kiddos to sleep.
Yep. And I know we've talked about this in a prior episode, but making sure that caregivers are on the same page too. I know that often when my kids were little, they would fall asleep in the car seat en route to daycare. And we actually had a practice that we adopted pretty early on with our oldest that we did not take the infant carrier into our daycare provider's home. Baby would come out and then be on a flat surface then at that point if they were still sleeping, for instance. But just reassuring that there's no way that little nugget is going to be left in the carrier and making sure that that's just not an option, right? When you leave it in the car, which I know logistically that takes some extra planning for who's going to do pickup and all that, but that was a good way for us to make sure that we didn't have a kid hanging out with a childcare provider in a carrier, for instance.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. Just having those conversations with everyone that's going to be helping provide care. So whether that's grandparents, aunts, uncles, your neighbor that's watching your kiddo. It's easy for us to assume that everyone knows what our best practice is, but just having that conversation is really good. And putting things in place that sort of prevent those habits is extra special too.
For sure. Okay, so the next one is a hot topic, and it continues to be, I think, more of an issue when we look at literature and what screens are doing to little people's minds. So a frequent question we hear folks ask is how much screen time is too much for kids?
Yeah, so this is a question that we get through LiveWell. We have a work group that's Safe and Healthy Kids, and we've actually been working on providing some of this education specifically with childcare providers because kids spend a lot of time in childcare settings. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has come out with recommendations specifically for our littles. So, for kids under the age of 2, they have specific recommendations, and it is really limiting or no screen time for those kiddos under the age of 2. There is some allowance for FaceTime, right? If we're going to be video conferencing with family members, like that doesn't count because that's being used as a communication tool, or if there is a specific educational component that the family members are participating with littles in. So what we want to avoid is using screens as the babysitter or as a way to occupy kiddos while we are not actively engaged with them in whatever it is that they're watching. Examples of this could be, right, we are waiting in line at the store to check out and you hand your kiddo the phone to watch something. So those are the things that we want to try to avoid. Now, as kids get older, there are not specific numbers recommended, but it really is up to the family to sort of create a plan of what's the best for each family member. And most people probably don't realize this, but the American Academy of Pediatrics has a fantastic tool online, and it is a family media planner. I've done it. You can go in, you add each person's name, and you can sort of click what is their age range, and then it will pop up this list of recommended practices, and then you can sort of decide what is the best fit for your family. And then it will give you this media plan at the end that you could sit down and use sort of as a guide or template of how you're going to manage all those screens and screen times for each family member. And you can change it as kids get older. Those expectations are going to change as well. So
For sure. It's hard. I think it is a continual battle for sure. I know a couple of years ago, we actually took away tablets from our kids because we were seeing that addictive behavior. We know when we get a screen, there's like a dopamine hit, just like us and our smartphones, right? And we were seeing concerning behaviors from our kids. Now, when we travel, they resurface, but it's also kind of like when you're addicted to something, I see that behavior resurface. So for our crew, we've just decided while we're at home in our day-to-day setting, tablets are not a part of our reality. But I also have lots of friends and family members that is a part of their reality. And there are great apps that you can put on these devices now that time out. So after a young person's been on a tablet for, let's say, 30 minutes, it's timed out and they're done for the day. So I think those are all great tools that families could use as they think about creating their plan.
yeah, and I would just recommend families thinking about making these transitions, especially if you have not really had many limitations or restrictions on screen time, understanding that there's going to be a transition period. And it's probably going to involve some breakdowns from your kiddos because they just haven't learned any other coping mechanisms of how to manage their emotions or how to entertain themselves. So just keep that in the back of your mind that there might be a few rough patches, but over time you can definitely transition. Kids will adapt to new routines. And in the long run, I think it's going to be healthier for everyone.
For sure, for sure. And kids are just like us. They like to know ahead and they like to know what to expect. So if you're anticipating a change in your family's screen use, communicating that with your kids, like, hey, in a couple of days, we're going to start doing XYZ. So whatever that is. And that may cause some angst and maybe some worry, but giving your kids a heads up that things are going to change on the horizon and laying that out beforehand, I think is really important. I share that frequently with my husband, like, hey, kids are just like us. They like to know what to anticipate. We, for the most part, adults don't like surprises either.
No.
Neither do kids. So where we can, like planning ahead. Now, life happens in the moment, right? And that's not always reasonable. But if you anticipate a major shift in practice, for sure, communicating that as a family, talking through what that's going to look and feel like is really important for your kids' developmental needs.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the next question is one that I know you get a lot of phone calls or messages about. And it goes something like this. Typically, a person will say, last night, I made my dinner and I had leftovers and I put them in a container. I left them out on the counter to cool off before I put them in the fridge. But when I woke up this morning, I realized I forgot and they were still sitting there. Are they safe to eat? Can I still eat them?
No, which is so disappointing on multiple levels. And people don't like it when I say, no, we would not recommend. The research tells us that there's typically a 4-hour window. Now, 4 hours is pretty gracious. And I tell folks I typically practice closer to a 2 to 3 hour window, depending on environmental factors. What's the humidity like? Is it hot? Another question that folks will call in with is that they've left a bag of groceries out in the car, which is so disappointing, right? Like it happens to us all. And you're wondering, like, it's been out there for half a day or overnight, whatever the case is. Can I bring it in and still consume it? No, we don't recommend that either. So the reality is when we get outside of that 4-hour temperature zone window, we are really looking at the potential for bacteria growth. And bacteria growth is not going to agree with our stomachs and consuming that, right? So to be safe, especially if something's left out in a hot car this time of year, like that holding window is really an hour. You also want to look at dairy products like milk, sour cream, cheese, those types of things we get down to a 1-hour window. So unfortunately, more often than not, if somebody calls in, I'm going to recommend that they discard that food product, which is really disappointing, especially with the cost of groceries right now. It's not great. Sometimes people will also call in and say like, hey, my deep freeze completely de-thawed. Can I still eat everything out there? And no, we wouldn't recommend that either, just because we don't know what that holding temperature of the food is. And one practice I would have, and this is what I practice at home in my deep freeze, is have a freezer thermometer in there. So you can take a peek if you notice like, oh gosh, the breaker tripped or we lost electricity, you could peek. I actually have to open mine up. Sometimes you can have external ones too. Mine's not that fancy. Mine's just like a little $10 thermometer. But being able to look to see what that is in your freezer. So keeping that in mind. If it's below 40 and it's still holding there and it's a freezing point, you're probably in good shape. But yeah, it's always really disappointing. And then sometimes people want to argue about it. And I'm like, well, research shows there's a risk of bacteria growth.
Yeah.
Another thing that I also tell people, so let's say they've kept it within that 4-hour window. I can have good news and say, sure, you can eat that. I also say if it looks or smells funny, that's also a good indication that something is growing in it
Right.
and not a good idea to consume.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say, short answer is it's not worth a trip to the ER
No.
over, 1 carton of cottage cheese or whatever it is that
No.
you're very passionate about. Like you can replace that, but we can't replace people.
Exactly. And the reality is you could have somebody in your household that's more vulnerable to foodborne illness. Maybe somebody who is a senior, an infant, kids also. Some of us as adults are more vulnerable to foodborne illness. So just keeping them in mind. Even if
Yeah.
it's not a trip to the ER and it's an upset stomach being up all night, it's not worth it. We definitely recommend pitching that, unfortunately, and buying new.
Definitely. Good tip. Good tip.
Yes. All right. So we are going to talk a little bit about car seats for a minute. So let's say my child is rear facing in their car seat, but their legs are touching the back of the seat. When should I switch them to a forward facing car seat?
Yeah, so that's a great question and one I definitely get quite a bit from families. And what has changed in our recommendation is we want to keep kids rear facing for as long as possible until they reach the maximum height or weight for that rear facing car seat. And for many kiddos, they're going to be able to stay rear facing till at least 2, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how much they grow. And what you'll notice is that their little legs start to get a lot longer in those toddler years. And for adults, it can look very uncomfortable because the kiddos are probably going to need to crisscross their legs and sit applesauce way, with their legs crossed. And it's very comfortable for them. They're not old and have creaky bones like we do. And so it does not really cause them any discomfort. So they can continue to face rear facing in that car seat until they reach that maximum height. As soon as we turn them around forward facing, we lose some of those protective factors that car seats offer every time we move kiddos up as they grow until they're using a seatbelt just like an adult. So keeping them rear facing as long as possible is the safest practice. And we don't really need to stress about their legs. They will be fine. They will be able to bend their little knees in, cross their legs, and sit comfortably in their car seat still.
For sure. They're not like us. Like, we couldn't do
No,
that, right?
no.
That we are
I
not
know.
as limber.
I know when we sit on the floor with our legs crossed, we're like, after a few minutes, everybody's like, this is not comfortable anymore. And so I think that's where some of that comes from because of our own experiences. But when you're little, it's not a problem.
No. I think for us, it got challenging as the kids got older. Like, our kids were rear facing into preschool. And we really delayed turning them around to be forward facing. And at some point they're going to ask, like, well, so-and-so is sitting in a booster seat, or so-and-so gets to face forward. So being prepared to navigate that. Now, a 2-year-old probably isn't going to ask you, like, why am I still facing backwards? But it really is the safest option. And just be prepared. At some point, your kid may ask why they're facing backwards.
Yes.
And someone else isn't.
Especially if there's older siblings, right, that have already turned forward facing. That's where I notice most happens with families is if there's a younger sibling, they can see older brother or sister has already turned around forward facing and, they want to be like their older sibling. And so that can create a little bit of a challenge. But I mean, I think just having an honest conversation and letting kids know that this is what's safest for you. And so we're going to continue to do that because we care about you and kids will understand that.
Totally. All right. Do you want to tackle a couple more questions here?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So families are crazy busy, but they still want to be able to provide nutritious meals. How can they plan those meals without getting so overwhelmed and feeling out of control?
Yeah. Keep it simple. You do not have to be preparing 4-course meals, especially during the week. Like, that's not my reality. It might be somebody else's, but keeping it simple. So the USDA talks about 5 food groups. So they have protein, grains, fruit, veggies, and then dairy. I think I said all 5 there. So essentially, like, those are the 5 food groups. And we look at MyPlate. So back when we were kids, we had this crazy pyramid that didn't mean anything to anyone. Thankfully, the past several years, we've shifted to this MyPlate model that the USDA has essentially. To me, that's a really good visual. I think keeping things simple, and sometimes like those 5 food groups may not be as prominent as what MyPlate shows. But keeping in mind that we want a protein, a veggie, and a grain. Definitely throwing fruit in there is super easy too. So for my crew, like, fruit is usually going to be some sort of fresh fruit, but it can be frozen. It could even be canned in juice or water. Those are great options that are more shelf stable. And making sure that you have a protein, a grain, and then a vegetable. Really, half of our plates should be fruits and veggies. And that's kind of like a visual that I keep in mind when I'm meal planning and what that looks like. Vegetables, I think, are really easy to leave out when you have kids because they're not the hot commodity on their plate. But you have to reintroduce vegetables frequently before your kid is probably going to decide if they like it or don't. And I think of broccoli, for instance. The first several times I fed my kids broccoli, nobody touched it. But now it's something we have multiple times a week, and it's kind of like a go-to vegetable. So keep introducing those, but keep things simple. You don't have to make them complicated. Something like tacos, like, we usually have a taco themed night, or maybe it's a chicken burrito bowl one night of the week, but tacos are honestly a pretty easy thing to put together for families. You could also think kids really like pasta too, maybe having a pasta night each week, making it fun, but you don't necessarily have to feed or plan for the same thing every week either. You can mix it up. I know our crew is kind of like on a 2-week rotation for meals. So I think if I fed them the same thing every week, they might get cranky. But every other week, we kind of like repeat a menu and some variations. So my kids are really into lime cilantro rice right now.
Oh, fancy.
Which you can make super easy, by the way, with some lime, cilantro, and white rice and avocado oil. But that's like something that could be the base to a burrito bowl, for instance, with veggies and chicken. Or we could do ground hamburger or ground turkey for taco meat in that bowl too. Or we could do tacos. So just, keeping it simple and creative and be easy on yourself.
I think something that goes with that was a question that we sometimes get about canned or frozen fruits or vegetables. If those are okay to use, are they still as nutritious? And the answer is yes. And they
Totally.
can 100% help ease the budget a little bit in our grocery shopping. So don't be afraid of, I think, using those, right, as part of your meal plan.
No, not at all. So I mentioned broccoli. I absolutely disdain cutting fresh broccoli. Like, it makes a mess, right? And then it's everywhere. And you also have to be careful if you're buying fresh broccoli. There could be mites on it. Like, just being real. You have to look at it, get it all rinsed off, cutting it. I always buy frozen broccoli. And the beauty of that is, like, out in that magical deep freeze that's in the garage, I have a whole basket full of frozen broccoli, and I can go out there when I need it. And it's not going to go bad, assuming we don't lose electricity for several hours. Like, it's always there. And you can shop sales with some of these more shelf-stable options. And my entire family only likes canned green beans. Like, that's totally fine. They wouldn't like fresh or frozen green beans. So figure out what works for your family. And there is no shame at all in using some of those more stable, long-lasting options like frozen or canned.
So it looks like we are about out of time for this topic, but we still have more questions. So we will definitely have to do a round 2 of frequently asked questions. So if you have questions, feel free to let us know. We can add them to our next frequently asked questions episode.
Yeah, let us know what you're thinking. We'd be happy to tackle any additional questions.
And we will leave resources in the show notes so you can connect with all the different information that we shared today and see if that's a good fit for your family.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to K-State Extension Douglas County's podcast. We hope you tune in again for not only more research-based information and resources you can trust, but also good conversation. Until next time.